Hi, so this is the Punisher Omnibus. So it's just, to my understanding, a collection of all of his appearances for several years in different comics. Um, so this is a pretty big book, but it is really helpful, I'll say, to have one focal point, like one character, because it's like a common thread, so you can follow it up throughout the entire volume, which I found really helpful as someone who hadn't really read any of the Punisher before, but having that one reoccurring character, it made the plots easier to follow, and this is the sort of thing where I could see just like sitting down and reading it. So I read two stories, and they're both about the Punisher and Daredevil interacting. And these two characters in particular interacting was incredibly interesting to witness because of how diametrically opposed they are just in philosophies and life perspectives, which I really appreciated just from like a philosophical standpoint as well as the actual action that's happening. So you have Daredevil, who, his actual human persona, Matt Murdock, is a lawyer, a defense attorney, and he believes really strongly in the power of the judicial system and just like the social system in general, social contracts. He believes in the system. He literally makes a living by defending it and using the system to defend people he feels are innocent. And then you have the Punisher, who feels that he has been failed by society, failed by these systems. I mean, he literally risked his life to fight for his country, and how was he repaid? By his family being brutally murdered. And that definitely caused some kind of mental schism for him, and now he believes in collective punishment. He is brutal and indiscriminate in how he hurts. If you do a bad action, you are dead to him, and he will quite literally kill you. It's having two characters with such diametrically opposing worldviews interact creates like a lot of tension, and it's just really thought-provoking to witness their different rationales colliding like that. Because I think that we're used to reading comics about traditional heroes like Daredevil, who, he's a good person. He'll take the criminal after he subdues him to the hospital to get medical help, he believes in humanity. And then you have the Punisher, who is a completely unique, hero character. He's not really a hero, but you're reading a story about him. And I think it's really interesting to see a departure from that tradition in a comic story. So the story is pretty gritty. It centers around this illegal drug trade that's happening. We open by a 12-year-old girl overdosing on this drug called angel dust. So it's very gritty, very deep. And this is when we're first introduced to an aspect of Daredevil's powers that I really appreciated having this closer look into. So at the bottom of this page over here, this girl has overdosed. She's 12 years old. She's jumped out of a window, and Daredevil has come to save her. And he's talking about how he can hear what's going on in her body physically, because that's one of his powers, superhuman hearing. And he says that I can feel her shattered ribs, her crushed vertebrae. I can hear her heartbeat slowing, stopping. Honestly, it's heartbreaking. He's talking about a 12-year-old girl, and you can really understand why he has such do-good mentality, because he can physically hear other people's pain, on a almost molecular level. That is just incredibly powerful, and you can really understand his perspective, why he literally sees the humanity in everyone, because he can literally hear their heartbeats, hear the pain that they're physically experiencing. And he has this experience once again later on in the story immediately afterwards, where he can hear the heartbeat of this criminal who's being beat up by the Punisher. And he says, literally what he says is, his heart, I've got to try to start it beating again, undo the damage the Punisher did, and he's performing CPR on this drug user who has killed people, who's not probably a great person, but once again, he hears that heartbeat, he hears that humanity. That is his connection to every other person. And the artwork does a really good job of portraying how important of a theme this is. You have these pink lines representing the heartbeat, and it really puts you into Daredevil's shoes, and I feel like that offered some very powerful insight to his character, and it sort of explained why he is the way that he is and why he makes these decisions. So I just really appreciate that from a thematic standpoint. I thought it was really well done. And ultimately, what's kind of sad is that this ability of his to see the humanity in everyone ultimately fails him. Because you have this other character, Hogman, who is a drug dealer, who is accused of murdering this other person, but Matt Murdock hears that his heartbeat doesn't skip when he says, "I'm innocent, I didn't kill him." And so he feels the need to defend him in court because he believes so strongly in innocence and everyone deserves a fair trial and everyone deserves defense, even if this person is horrible because he was the drug dealer that gave those narcotics to the 12-year-old girl who died in the beginning. And because Matt Murdock is an excellent lawyer, he gets off. He is acquitted and he is not charged for second-degree murder, only to find out at the end that he did do it. His heart just didn't skip a beat because he had a pacemaker. When I read that plot twist, heartbreaking. Because imagine being a character like Daredevil who believes so strongly in the justice system, and then to realize that you did that. You got a murderer and a drug dealer and a horrible person off because you made a mistake. I can't even imagine how painful that would be for him to just process. And it's amazing to see that thematic element of the heartbeat ultimately be flipped against him. And it really shakes, I can imagine that would really shake his worldview. And as a reader, it makes me understand the Punisher's perspective a little bit more. So it's very interesting. So at the beginning of these stories, you have two characters very far apart, but then at the end, you can kind of understand that there might be a point where they could meet and even agree on some things. Because there's this huge plot twist that really shakes Matt's faith in the justice system. I can't even imagine, like when I read that, honestly, like my heart leapt a little bit in my chest because I don't have a pacemaker, because that was really, really powerful. But even at the end, Matt is talking to Billy, this kid who he got off originally, he's trying to put him on the good path, straight and narrow path, even though his sister has died. And he still says that the only way to stop us from killing each other is to make rules, laws, and stick to them. They don't always work, but mostly they do, and they're all we've got. So even after this experience, he's still really holding on to his worldview. He's not a character who changes very easily, because I think his worldview has been informed by like the traumatic experience of being blinded, of being a superhero, of meeting people from all walks of life, and that's not just going to change overnight. But still, it was really interesting to see that faith in humanity be tested a little bit, because I think that as readers, we don't want to read stories about people who are never challenged, about people who never change their minds, about people who are just steady and forward and constant. And that's part of the appeal of a story like this about Daredevil, and also part of the appeal of a character like the Punisher, because he's complex and morally gray, and I can understand why he does the things that he does, but the things that he does are horrible. And it's so compelling to read a story about a person who isn't necessarily good. And I think those kinds of stories are really important. I think it's important that we are challenged with different perspectives and messed up people who have gone through messed up things. I find that really powerful. So I certainly enjoyed reading this, and I'm someone who I had some bit of background knowledge about the Punisher and Daredevil's characters, but I'd never read specific comics about them before. But even so, I found that they were really well written. I found it easy to understand the world that I was being dropped into, and even the characters, especially because they're interacting with each other, so they kind of got to like restate their whole spiels sort of in introduction to each other, which was helpful for a reader. And I have to say, in general, just the format of this omnibus, it is like a larger book, but I did find it easier to follow just because it is centered on the Punisher, one character, so you always have like a focal point of every story you can return to. So this is the sort of thing where you can just actually read it front to back in chronological order, and it'll make sense because it's ordered that way in order of his appearances in different comics. And so I certainly did appreciate that, and I'm someone who was interested in the character of Punisher, so this was a great introduction, and I think this works really well for someone who maybe picks up a comic and the Punisher is in it, and they're like, wow, this guy's like really interesting and new and funky, and I want to learn more about him. And then this might be something that they pick up or borrow from a friend, because it's all about him, it's centered around him. And yeah, I really did enjoy reading this. I found that it was very thematically rich. It was very well written. Of course, the artwork was compelling and visceral, especially during the fight scenes. And I think that a story about the justice system and the faith that we have in humanity and in each other is incredibly relevant, not even like the 80s when this was published, but even today. I think that this aged really well thematically, and I still connected to it as a modern reader.